By mid-1942, the Pacific War had reached a critical juncture. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan had rapidly expanded across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. From the Philippines to the Solomon Islands, their forces moved with apparent invincibility, striking with precision and overwhelming speed. But beneath this veneer of dominance, cracks were forming. Supply lines stretched thousands of miles across open ocean. Intelligence was fragmented. Morale, though high, depended on the perception of inevitable victory. Guadalcanal, a small jungle-covered island in the southern Solomons, suddenly emerged as a pivotal objective. Its position allowed control over sea lanes between the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Allied commanders recognized that holding Guadalcanal would block Japanese advances, deny them a forward air base, and provide a staging ground for future counteroffensives. Conversely, Japanese planners saw the island as a bulwark to protect their southern perimeter and maintain dominance in the Solomons. The stage was set for a collision of strategy, geography, and human endurance. The U.S. Marines, freshly hardened by training in amphibious assaults and jungle warfare, prepared for their first major offensive in the Pacific. They would face an enemy confident in its battlefield reputation. Yet the Marines brought a combination of determination, improvisation, and unyielding discipline. Weapons were loaded, rations packed, and orders clear: secure the island at all costs. Japanese commanders, meanwhile, assumed the Americans would crumble under the weight of the unfamiliar terrain, the relentless heat, and the oppressive humidity. Underestimating the resolve of the Marines would become their first and costliest mistake. The night before the landing, transport ships hovered offshore. Marines waited in landing craft, their muscles tense, eyes scanning the black horizon. Somewhere in the jungle, Japanese sentries drifted into half-conscious patrols, unaware of the storm about to descend. This was not merely a battle over land. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and nerve, a struggle that would reveal both the limits of human fear and the extraordinary resilience of those who refused to yield. In the early hours of August 7, 1942, the U.S. 1st Marine Division prepared to land on Guadalcanal. Nearly 19,000 Marines would come ashore in waves, supported by a modest fleet of cruisers and destroyers. The Japanese garrison, estimated at around 2,500 men, was scattered across the island, underestimating the scale of the invasion. Their intelligence suggested that any American force would be small, hesitant, and easily repelled. This miscalculation would soon prove catastrophic. The landing beaches were narrow, flanked by dense jungle and hidden coral ridges. Marines stepped into waist-deep water, rifles held high, eyes fixed on the thick green wall ahead. The air was heavy with salt and anticipation. Each man carried the weight of not only his weapon and pack, but the lives of those beside him. Supply lines were fragile, but morale was high. Every Marine knew the significance of their mission: capture the airfield the Japanese had begun constructing, deny the enemy a strategic foothold, and establish a base for future operations. Japanese patrols, still confident in their superiority, were positioned in fragmented outposts, relying on the dense foliage for concealment. They had prepared for an American retreat, not a determined advance. Their orders emphasized harassment, ambush, and psychological pressure, methods that had worked elsewhere in the Pacific. Yet Guadalcanal's terrain was unforgiving, and the Marines' training in small unit tactics, jungle movement, and night fighting made them a dangerous opponent. The first night of confrontation would test every assumption. Japanese troops moved silently along narrow trails, expecting to strike panicked and uncoordinated Americans. The Marines, however, had spent weeks drilling in similar conditions on islands like New Caledonia and Samoa. Every squad was aware that failure here could jeopardize the entire Solomon campaign. Jungle sounds, birds, insects, and distant waves masked the approach of men who believed victory was certain. By sunset, the stage was set for an engagement that would last through the night. The Americans, outnumbered in specific encounters but prepared and resolute, were ready to meet the Japanese where they least expected it. A clash of strategy, experience, and human endurance loomed. When the first shots rang out, neither side would be prepared for the staggering toll the night would exact. The tension, the anticipation, and the weight of history hung over the island, leading directly to the human, tactical, and technological angles that would define the battle. The first night on Guadalcanal revealed the raw humanity behind the uniforms. Marines, many barely out of training camps, faced the oppressive darkness of the jungle with only their discipline and courage to guide them. Sweat ran in rivulets down their faces as they crouched behind palms and ferns, rifles poised, hearts pounding. Fear was constant, but it was controlled, channeled into precise, deliberate action. Japanese soldiers, equally trained but operating under overconfidence, marched through the same oppressive environment, expecting minimal resistance. For them, shock and confusion replaced confidence as sporadic rifle fire shattered the stillness. Individual heroism on both sides defined the early hours. A Marine throwing himself into a ditch to shield his squad, a Japanese soldier continuing an assault despite a severe wound. Every movement carried weight, the difference between life and death in the tangled green labyrinth of Guadalcanal. The human cost of misjudgment became clear quickly. Panic, hesitation, and courage existed side by side, separated by inches and seconds. For those who survived the night, the experience left a permanent mark, an acute awareness that bravery and endurance were as vital as any weapon in the arsenal. Guadalcanal's jungle imposed severe tactical constraints. Trails were narrow, visibility limited to mere feet, and any movement risked exposure. The Marines utilized their knowledge of small unit tactics to establish overlapping fields of fire, ambush points, and defensive perimeters. Night fighting drills learned in training gave them a decisive edge. The Japanese attacked in traditional formations, expecting to overwhelm with numbers and momentum. But the dense undergrowth fragmented their advance. Machine guns hidden behind palm trunks, snipers in concealed positions, and coordinated platoon maneuvers turned the environment into a defensive ally for the Marines. Every hillock, every clearing became a potential death trap. Commanders on both sides adapted in real time. Messages were relayed through runners and radios, but jungle interference made coordination difficult. The battle became a series of micro-engagements, fire exchanged at close quarters, flanking attempts and counterattacks executed under constant pressure. The Marines' ability to adapt and maintain cohesion transformed the expected route into a calculated, lethal response. Weaponry and equipment played an outsized role in the outcome. Marines wielded M19903 Springfield rifles, Browning automatic rifles, and M1919 machine guns, supplemented by grenades and flamethrowers in specific operations. Their artillery support, though limited offshore, provided sporadic but critical firepower. Communications relied on radios and runners, often under heavy fire. Japanese forces carried Arisaka rifles, light machine guns, and grenades, optimized for mass infantry assaults but less adaptable to fragmented terrain. Their assumptions of fire superiority failed when faced with entrenched positions and overlapping fields of Marine machine gun fire. Night fighting diminished the advantages of both sides, but American preparedness, coupled with weapon placement and tactical innovation, turned technology into a force multiplier rather than a mere tool. The interplay of human skill and mechanical precision became decisive. Rifles and machine guns could not replace courage or coordination, but in trained hands, they magnified the impact of every calculated move in the dark jungle. Leadership on both sides shaped every moment of the Guadalcanal night. On the American side, Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson, and his subordinate officers maintained strict discipline and morale. Orders were precise, expectations clear. Each squad knew its sector of responsibility. Edson's insistence on decentralized decision-making allowed Marines to respond instantly to evolving threats, turning the chaos of the jungle into a controlled defensive network. Japanese commanders, in contrast, relied heavily on rigid doctrines and the assumption of Marine retreat. Colonel Kionao Ichiki, leading the advance, expected surprise and momentum to carry his men to victory. But when the Americans held, confusion spread through the Japanese ranks. Communication breakdowns and the inability to adapt under unexpected resistance resulted in fragmented assaults, exposing soldiers to concentrated fire. Leadership, decisive and adaptive on the Marine side, indecisive and rigid on the Japanese side, became a defining factor in the night's unfolding. The Japanese approach to Guadalcanal reflected a blend of pride, overconfidence, and logistical overreach. Ichiki's detachment, known as the Ichiki Regiment, underestimated the scale of the invasion, believing they could achieve victory before dawn. Their training emphasized aggressive charges and night attacks, tactics successful elsewhere but ill-suited to Guadalcanal's dense jungle and prepared defenses. As the night progressed, initial confidence turned to confusion and fear. Lines broke, soldiers were isolated, and panic spread faster than orders could be given. Many Japanese units continued assaults despite mounting casualties, driven by honor codes and the belief that retreat was dishonorable. By sunrise, the psychological toll was evident. Exhausted, disoriented, and diminished, the survivors represented a shattered force confronting both a relentless enemy and their own misjudgments. The Guadalcanal night battle tested not just physical skill but mental resilience. Marines endured the oppressive heat, mosquito swarms, and the constant expectation of death. The psychological strain was immense, yet courage under fire, cohesion, and trust in leadership allowed them to maintain focus. Every decision, whether to fire, hold position, or advance, was amplified by fear and adrenaline. Japanese soldiers confronted the opposite dilemma: expectation versus reality. The belief that Americans would flee created initial overconfidence. When that expectation failed, panic and moral disorientation set in. Morale eroded under the dual pressures of relentless fire and the jungle's suffocating environment. By dawn, the psychological impact of the night had crystallized. 800 Japanese casualties lay testament to the cost of underestimation and the unyielding resolve of the Marines. As midnight cloaked Guadalcanal, the first wave of Japanese attackers emerged from the dense jungle, moving silently through moonlit clearings. Ichiki's detachment, approximately 917 men, advanced with confidence, rifles and bayonets at the ready. Their mission was simple in conception but deadly in execution: strike the American perimeter, overwhelm the defenders, and secure the airfield before dawn. The Marines, entrenched along ridges and behind hastily constructed foxholes, waited in tense silence. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of palm fronds was magnified in the humid darkness. Machine guns were positioned strategically, rifles primed, grenades within reach. Edson's orders were clear: hold at all costs, adapt to enemy movement, and trust your fellow Marines. At roughly 23:30, the first volleys erupted. Japanese soldiers expecting disorganized resistance were met with disciplined, overlapping fire. Bullets tore through the undergrowth, the metallic roar of rifles punctuated by the staccato of machine guns. Chaos engulfed the attackers. Jungle trails that seemed straightforward on the map became funnels of death. Marines exploited every natural choke point, forcing the enemy into kill zones where numbers could not compensate for exposed positions. Close quarters combat erupted in the thick undergrowth. Marines wielded rifles with bayonets, hand grenades arced through the night, and every clearing became a crucible of violence. The Japanese, trained for frontal assault, found themselves trapped and isolated. Attempts to regroup were thwarted by accurate suppressive fire. Edson moved among his men, reinforcing positions, adjusting fire, and inspiring a calm resolve amid the blood and smoke. By WWII, the initial shock had set the tone. Japanese troops had suffered heavy casualties without gaining any ground. Entire units were pinned and morale began to fracture. Marines, though exhausted, maintained cohesion, their training and leadership transforming the jungle into an ally rather than an obstacle. The first decisive moments had passed, but the night was far from over. The outcome hinged on whether the Japanese could recover or be broken entirely. As the night pressed on, the Japanese launched repeated assaults, each met with the relentless discipline of the Marines. Waves of soldiers emerged from the shadows, only to be cut down by interlocking fields of fire. The jungle became a nightmarish labyrinth, illuminated sporadically by muzzle flashes and the orange glow of burning brush. By 02:30, the psychological strain on the Japanese troops was palpable. Leaders attempted to rally scattered units, but exhaustion and fear had sapped cohesion. Small groups pressed forward in desperate attempts to break through, only to vanish into kill zones. Marines exploited every opportunity. Snipers picked off officers. Grenades disrupted concentrated formations, and machine guns maintained a steady, unyielding cadence. Edson and his junior officers rotated through the lines, ensuring ammunition was redistributed. Wounded evacuated and defensive positions reinforced. Marines communicated with hand signals and whispered orders, avoiding unnecessary noise that could betray their positions. The combination of meticulous planning and improvisation magnified their firepower. turning the night into a lethal trap for those who had underestimated their resolve. By 04:40, the final assaults had faltered. Survivors of the Ichiki detachment were scattered, disoriented, and retreating. Jungle trails were littered with the dead and wounded. When the first rays of dawn pierced the canopy, the toll was clear. Approximately 800 Japanese soldiers had perished before achieving any significant objective. The Marines, though exhausted and bloodied, held the line, their defensive network unbroken. The night had transformed expectations. What the Japanese had assumed would be an easy victory became a devastating defeat. The combination of leadership, human endurance, tactical innovation, and environmental mastery had forged a turning point, not just for the battle, but for the Guadalcanal campaign itself. By sunrise on August 8, 1942, the full scale of the night's violence was visible. The jungle, once a place of concealment and strategy, was now marked by the remnants of a brutal confrontation. Nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead, their uniforms soaked with sweat and blood, scattered among the ferns and palms. The Ichiki detachment had been effectively annihilated, leaving survivors traumatized, disoriented, and isolated in the dense terrain. For the Marines, the toll was significant but manageable: 40 killed and roughly 80 wounded. These losses, though heavy, were far lower than what had been expected given the scale and intensity of the Japanese assaults. The battle had proven the effectiveness of small unit tactics, disciplined fire, and adaptive leadership under extreme conditions. Colonel Edson's coordination and the Marines' resilience had transformed what could have been a catastrophic night into a defining victory. The strategic implications were immediate. Guadalcanal, once a contested objective, now had a secure foothold for the Allies. The airfield, later named Henderson Field, could be completed and fortified, providing a critical base for air operations in the Solomons. This victory demonstrated to both sides that the war in the Pacific would not be dominated solely by numerical superiority or aggressive doctrine. Preparation, adaptation, and morale could shift outcomes dramatically. Japanese command in Rabaul and Tokyo was stunned. Reports of Ichiki's decimation forced a reassessment of assumptions about American resolve and capability. Reinforcements would be rushed to the Solomons and future operations would be planned with increased caution. The perception of invincibility that had accompanied Japanese expansion was severely damaged. Beyond the immediate losses and gains, Guadalcanal had provided lessons in the psychological dimensions of warfare. Both sides now recognized that underestimating the enemy's will to fight could be more lethal than any tactical error. For the Marines, confidence in their training and leadership was solidified. For the Japanese, a harsh reality had begun to erode morale. In the days following the battle, Guadalcanal became a proving ground for the broader Pacific campaign. Marines consolidated positions, dug deeper defenses, and completed key sections of Henderson Field. Their ability to sustain operations under harsh tropical conditions, enduring heat, humidity, disease, and supply challenges proved crucial. The battle had tested not only their combat effectiveness, but their capacity for endurance, improvisation, and cohesion under sustained stress. Japanese forces reeled from the shock. The annihilation of Ichiki's detachment forced Tokyo to revise strategic planning in the Solomons. Reinforcements were dispatched, but the psychological impact of the defeat lingered. Commanders could no longer assume American forces would collapse under pressure. Guadalcanal had shifted the perception of the war. The Allies, once seen as hesitant and inexperienced, now demonstrated both tactical acumen and the determination to hold critical ground. The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps learned key operational lessons. Jungle terrain, night engagements, and small unit coordination became central to planning future offensives. Logistics and resupply, long taken for granted in training exercises, proved vital to maintaining combat effectiveness. Guadalcanal underscored the need for adaptability in the face of an enemy who, though highly trained and aggressive, could be defeated with preparation, discipline, and ingenuity. Reports circulated among Allied high command, highlighting the resilience of the Marines and the catastrophic misjudgment by Japanese forces. Historians would later note that the battle marked the first major defeat for Japan in a land engagement during the Pacific War. While casualties were heavy, the psychological victory resonated across the theater. A small, determined force could withstand and repel a numerically superior opponent, even under the most challenging conditions. Guadalcanal became a symbol of endurance, courage, and the power of disciplined strategy. From the night's initial chaos to the grim morning tally, the island had revealed the costs of miscalculation, the value of leadership, and the capacity for human courage to shape history. Guadalcanal's first night was more than a battle. It was a crucible of human endurance and strategic foresight. The Marines had demonstrated that courage, preparation, and adaptability could overcome fear and numerical disadvantage. The dense jungle, the oppressive heat, and the darkness of night tested every soldier's limits. Yet discipline and leadership forged victory where chaos had been expected. For the Japanese, the night exposed the peril of overconfidence. Assumptions of easy success dissolved under precise, coordinated resistance. Their losses were not merely numbers on a page. They were lessons in the unforgiving realities of warfare, lessons written in blood and shadow. The battle also left a lasting imprint on the Pacific War. Guadalcanal became a proving ground for tactics, night combat, and the integration of small unit strategy with broader operational planning. It reshaped perceptions. No longer could victories be assumed based on reputation or previous success. Every engagement required respect for the opponent's resolve, ingenuity, and humanity. In the stillness of dawn, as the first light illuminated the jungle and the remnants of battle, Guadalcanal stood as a testament to both the cost and the value of courage. It reminded the world that wars are not won solely by numbers or firepower, but by the unwavering determination of those who refuse to yield, and by the leaders who can channel fear into decisive action. The echoes of that night would ripple through the Pacific, shaping strategies, inspiring Marines, and embedding the legend of Guadalcanal into history. A single night had changed the course of a campaign, proving that resilience and resolve could turn the tide against even the most formidable foe.